I'm not going to introduce today's mad lad. Instead, I'm just going to ask you a question. Have you ever wanted to talk to God? Please leave a like and a comment on this video because it really helps me in the algorithm. Black Friday shopping is hard. You've all seen videos of angry hordes battering at shop doors, ready for a massive brawl, fighting tooth and nail to get all of those juicy deals, but as much fun as this Royal Rumble must sound for real alpha males, this doesn't work for little old me. The Karen rage is really scary, and my delicate YouTuber build is too soft and fragile to push its way through to any good stuff before it's all sold out. But luckily, I'll be going in prepared this year because the best deal of them all is within easy reach of my grasping noodle arms. It's the Raycon Black Friday sale, baby! Woo! And as if getting premium audio quality for half the price of other brands wasn't good enough, Raycon is now offering up to 30% off. And if you need more convincing, Raycon offers an amazing bang for your buck because they've just added a bunch of new features to their everyday earbuds, which are essential for me surviving this PvP-enabled shopping event. For example, you already know that Raycons are so comfy and provide such a great fit with their optimized gel tips that they will not fall out no matter how much I get knocked about by the crowds. But when I get knocked face first into a door, and have to lick the doorknob to restore my hit points, the IP66 weatherproofing and sweat resistance saves my Raycons from the slobber that goes everywhere as I power up. But these shopping crowds are very brutal, so this protective case is an absolute godsend as it makes my Raycon so much more durable than I am. And they even support wireless charging, which synergizes amazingly with my Raycon's fast charging ability, which can get me 90 minutes of playtime with just 10 minutes of charging. This is perfect for when I need to drown out the carnage and listen to epic movie trailer music. It's not movie trailer music, it's neoclassical, but anyway, so that I can feel powerful before I get rammed by a trolley and knocked out. But when I really need to lock in for a second wind, I can easily switch tracks to Freebird with the earbud tap function. And as you can see from my case, Raycons come in a range of very snazzy colours like carbon black and royal blue. So you can even get earbuds to match my eyes as I leave the shop. But of course, there is no Black Friday sale easier and safer than Raycons. All you have to do is click my link down in the description or go to buyraycon.com/Dankula to get up to 30% off site-wide. First, let's set the tone.
You're fucking fucking.
Hear those bleeps? Yeah, you're going to be hearing those a lot in this video. Born in 1969, Terence Andrew Davis came into the world just in time for computing to go crazy, starting off strong with a love for the gizmos because he grew up with an Apple II. As he got a little bit older and everything went retro in the 80s, Terry learned assembly on the Commodore 64 and became a very proficient self-taught programmer, which went on to shape his entire worldview to the point of thinking that the brain itself is a computer. Which, technically it kind of is. Despite having been raised as a Catholic, Terry was too much of what he called a scientific materialist to see the need for a soul. I know that's a little bit cringe, but to be fair, Terry was a Reddit user. And we all had that edgy atheist phase at some point in our lives. So cut him a little bit of slack. But he will see the light and redeem himself later on. Being a massive fucking nerd, Terry did very well at school and university. He left the former with an SAT score in the top 2 to 3% at 1440. And he graduated magna cum laude from Arizona State University in December of 1992 with a GPA of 3.63. Basically, as a lot of people already know, Terry was a genius. 2 years later, he got his master's in electrical engineering, during which he developed a physics simulator named SysSim. But all of these credentials are secondary to Terry's accomplishments in life because his career actually started in earnest while he was still a student. In 1990, he started working at Ticketmaster in a position that he described as like an internship, despite revealing years later that while he was working for Ticketmaster, he was responsible for a lot more than you would expect, such as work as a lead engineer on its VAX OS and its ticketing system. Terry then moved on to developing hardware, like a barcode reader and a laser ticket printer, though nothing he designed was actually produced. So he decided to embark on a bit of a career change, looking to make satellite control systems, because what engineer doesn't dream of glorious service in the military-industrial complex? Using a secret social trick unknown to most in Terry's field called networking, he put out feelers for work with defence contractors, using connections provided by his industrial engineer father who had worked on the Titan system back in the day. Despite being a genius with a promising career, I do need to clear up a little bit of an urban legend about Terry. Terry was not and never had anything to do with the heavy hitters of the time, the PayPal Mafia, who were former PayPal employees who went on to become the most influential tech bros of the era, before Silicon Valley was run like a call centre. But that doesn't mean that Terry didn't have it in him to do so. Terry was extremely clever and highly competent, and if he wanted to, he could have outperformed all of them. So it's a real shame that Terry's career soon came to a screeching halt. In March of 1996, Terry noticed something a little bit strange. He began to see guys in suits all over the place, and they were so ubiquitous that Terry thought that they were following and watching him. At first, this didn't seem like too big of a deal. Terry figured that he was just being researched by employers to whom he'd applied for positions. After all, he was looking to get into a pretty sensitive field that was related to the military. But then, it got rather weird. The men in suits weren't going away. Then Terry began to get concerned. He began to wonder if their intentions were a bit more nefarious. He had done some pretty cool things in his career so far, and he was getting worried that malevolent forces thought that his skills with computers were getting too powerful. But what institution could possibly be big enough to stalk Terry so relentlessly? Could it be the government, or worse, the CIA? Terry knew that he was in danger and needed to escape. So he got in his car and he started driving. And driving, and driving, and driving. Guided only by a voice on the radio. That's right, despite having abandoned his faith for more materialistic pursuits, no one is lost beyond redemption. So, God himself spoke unto Terry through the car radio and commanded him to drive hundreds of miles south all the way to Texas. There, Terry took his car apart looking for tracking devices, threw away his keys, and then wandered off into the desert. But this is not to say that Terry was blind. Now bestowed with divine visions, Terry could see clearer than ever and therefore did not meet his maker just yet while out in the sandy wilderness. He was so erratic that I doubt he was walking with rhythm. Instead, Terry met a police officer who was kind enough to give him a lift back to civilization. They did not get very far before Terry started to think that this police officer might be one of them. So Terry jumped out of the police car while it was still moving, and he broke his clavicle. While being patched up in the hospital, Terry overheard nurses talking about artifacts that they could see on his x-ray. Clearly, they were just bone fragments from his injury, but Terry interpreted this as him having had implants installed by aliens. And he was worried about what the doctors would do if they found them. So once again, Terry did the only logical thing. He escaped from the hospital. However, he didn't get very far. Once out of the building, he tried to steal an idling truck and was immediately arrested. Then he tried to escape again, attempting to open his cell door by sticking the arms of his glasses into the plug socket to try and flip a breaker and unlock it. But all he managed to do was learn that his glasses were non-conductive as the guards all went nope and jumped on him. Oh, and by the time the guards actually got to Terry, he was naked. Because, in his words, I was thinking of corporate logos being bad or something. Well, to be completely fair, they've only gotten worse since. After this little episode at the hospital, Terry was sectioned for 2 weeks. During this time, he refused to eat, and he actually chucked a chair through the window of the mental hospital. The professional opinion of those looking after Terry was that this whole affair was a manic episode, and they believed him to be bipolar. Though, soon enough, Terry was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Not that that was very hard to figure out. It was fairly obvious from the beginning that there was something terribly, seriously wrong with Terry. I mean, look at this picture of him with a mullet. That's a clear sign if I ever saw one. Upon his return from the mental hospital, Terry renounced his previous atheism, saying, and I quote, "Looking back on it, I'm not especially proud of the logic and thinking. It looks very young and childish and pathetic." And he expressed guilt for being such a technology advocate atheist. Seeking to live like Jesus, Terry donated all of his stuff to charity, even giving $10,000 to Arizona State's campus ministry, the Newman Center. And he showered his nieces and nephews with gifts. Then he continued to develop his relationship with God, describing his direct communication with him as not very flattering. It looks a lot like mental illness, as opposed to some glorious revelation from God. I was being led along the path by God. It just doesn't look very glorious. So that's what Terry was up to as he lived his more humble life in Arizona, running on a 48-hour schedule that had him awake for 32 hours and then asleep for 16, and getting sectioned every 6 months or so after a manic episode. But his mental health wasn't so bad that he couldn't start his own company, home automation and robotic equipment, for which he created CAD software that allowed for the creation of 3D models on a home PC. Now, this sounds like really basic stuff now, but Terry was actually very ahead of the curve. Bear in mind that BioShock Infinite was still 16 years away, so this technology was still in its infancy. But Terry wasn't done there. He wanted to hold his 3D models in his hands. So he also worked on a prototype for a 3-axis milling machine. Basically, the inverse of a 3D printer, which cuts the objects out of a block of material rather than building it up. Unfortunately, however, Terry had to abandon this project after his machine nearly burned his apartment down. While the CNC machine was a bust, Terry had a few other jobs and projects going here and there, including doing a bit more tinkering with SysSim. But he eventually had to move in with his parents in Las Vegas in 2003, where he lived on a monthly tugboat of Social Security and disability. But unlike someone, Terry didn't just sit idle and leech off government money and the patience of elderly parents. He worked on a sequel to George Orwell's 1984, which didn't really get anywhere. Literally 1984. But soon enough, his mental state calmed right down as he embarked on his true mission full time. All of his communication with God bore fruit as his path was laid out before him. The execution of a grand project, the culmination of thousands of years of history, and the ultimate use of Terry's particular set of skills. So he dusted off an old side project, an operating system that he'd started working on in 1994, named Terry's Protected Mode Operating System. And he got to work. The project that would go on to define Terry's legacy went through a number of names. The J operating system, Lucid, Sparrow OS, and finally, TempleOS. The last rebrand happened in March of 2013 as the project approached the finish line. And Terry celebrated its completion the following June by declaring on the homepage of his website, "God's temple is finished. Now God kills the CIA until it spreads." I know, we will get there eventually, but we need to talk about the operating system first. The mission statement for TempleOS was twofold: to serve as God's third temple and also to be a throwback to the Commodore 64 and early DOS days. For the latter purpose, the system was also intended as an educational and experimental tool for programmers looking to tinker and make oddball software. To that end, it was completely open source so that others could play with it. On a technical level, TempleOS is programmed in Holy C, a programming language somewhere between C and C++. C+, if you will. There's also a file system named Red C and a debugger called Adam. But as much as I love the holy puns, they are not the real indicators of Terry's genius on display here. The first thing that you will notice if you've ever run or seen videos of TempleOS is that it is very, very fast, booting in under a second, because Terry made a point of maximizing efficiency, running everything with as few lines of code as possible. Also, the entire main menu is in text mode, even the icons and animated models, which Terry managed by creating a whole fucking file format to essentially create images as text. But most importantly, everything in TempleOS runs in the kernel, and as such, there is no networking whatsoever. Also, it was built for the most bare bones of hardware. So there is also no support for graphics and sound cards at all. So one would have to rely on VGA graphics and the PC's own speakers. And all of this, the whole lot, the entire thing was made completely from scratch. Terry worked completely alone, writing over 120,000 lines of code all by himself. Terry made the bootloader, coded the sound, and made the UI all by himself. And just like Noah with his Ark, Terry made the operating system to God's specifications. The 640 by 480 resolution with 16 colours was demanded as God's covenant, akin to circumcision. Terry's words, not mine. But when you put it that way, fuck that, we're doing 1080p, I refuse to mutilate my display. But anyway, the UI is pretty scuffed to look at. But cyan is God's favourite colour, so what can you do? It is janky as fuck to handle, but hey, it's functional, which is really something. Well, I say functional, perhaps even utilitarian.
An idiot admires complexity. A genius admires simplicity. A physicist tries to make it simple. Anyway, an idiot, anything the more complicated it is, the more he will admire it. If you make something so clusterfucked he can't understand it, he's going to think you're a god because you made it so complicated nobody can understand it. That's how they write journals and academic journals. They try to make it so complicated people think you're a genius.
Terry was very, very big on keeping things simple and therefore really was not a fan of Linux and by extension Linus Torvalds because of how complex it is. Terry complained about Linus a lot.
You must have got it from Linus because you had to. I'm like, dude, man, let me try and explain this to you. I have a motorcycle.
But Terry's superiority to Linus was best encapsulated by the fact that Terry built his own compiler. You know, that thing that he might have mentioned once or twice.
Okay, listen, little have you ever written a compiler? Have you ever written an interrupt routine? You little
But his emphasis of it is warranted because that's a pretty nuts fucking thing to do for reasons that I honestly can't make sense of. But it does take up a sixth of TempleOS's total code, so it must be pretty big. And Terry was really proud of this, because as if being the architect of God's third temple wasn't enough, Terry also flexed his accomplishment with the compiler to mug the Pope, essentially insisting that he was holier.
The Pope says he has a holy kernel. I don't know. Did he talk to God in the temple, in God's official? I am Solomon's successor. You're just a pope. And I fucking wrote an operating system with compiler. Don't even know what a compiler is. Fucking pope.
That's probably the least unorthodox thing that Terry has ever said. Unfortunately, I can't really say anything on a more technical level because neither I nor my staff have that kind of autism. So we're not going to dwell on it too much beyond saying, yes, it's a Unix system. I know this. I really enjoy the lines of code. But it does seem that even Linus, the other one, barely has enough autism for this either. TempleOS is so unintuitive and takes so much getting used to that he seemed equal parts confused and impressed before even getting into it. Though he did enjoy the racing game. But Terry didn't stop at a racing game by any means. He created loads of programs for TempleOS with an emphasis on creating them with a low line count, including games like a first-person shooter titled Castle Frankenstein and a flight sim titled Eagle Dive. Oh, and before you ask, yes. However, all of that is fluff. A sideshow to draw in the masses. We need to focus on what really matters, which is God. After all, what is a temple if not a place of worship? To that end, TempleOS features an application that gives you Bible verses when you need them, sometimes with amusing results.
For public domain, he takes start. I think it's a mirror if you give God something funny.
I'm not going to lie, it's nice to see Terry have a good laugh like that. None of the other clips are particularly fun. But if you're seeking some more in-depth wisdom than just a random verse, the entire Bible is also just a keyboard shortcut away. But what if that doesn't provide the answers that you seek either? What if you have questions? Well, that is where Terry's favourite part of the whole system comes in. The Oracle. After Egypt is a little game where you simply walk up Mount Horeb with Moses while dodging the occasional sheep and other obstacles until you find the burning bush and make an offering. And from there, God speaks. Well, the software spits out a bunch of words determined by a process of pseudo-RNG building phrases from a word list. But just the word list. There is no punctuation and the results are incomprehensible gibberish. But that's by design. Terry compared it to speaking in tongues or using a Ouija board. God's words come out and it's your job to do the work and interpret them correctly. But it's still a direct interface with the Lord. When Terry promised God on tap, I think he meant that after Egypt is the faucet, but you still have to drink. What, you thought that literally talking to God would be easy? You've got to put the work in. But at least as the high priest of the temple, Terry was willing to show you how.
Yeah, you got to do offerings and then he'll talk. So tell a funny, make a comic that's genuinely funny and then randomly open the Bible and then he'll talk. You get out of it what you put into it. You get out of it what you put into it. Do you know what a random number is? I know what Jesus is, yeah. Okay, go save yourself. I don't know.
In fact, Terry was pretty good at it because he talked to God a lot, to the point where they just chatted in addition to talking shop. Apparently, God's favourite band is the Beatles, his favourite car is a Beamer, and his favourite national anthem is Latvia's. Though, I think something might have been lost in translation when Terry explained his reasons why.
So I asked God his favourite national anthem, and he said Latvia's national anthem. And what you have to understand is that God explained that when he judges a song, it's like having sex with a 12-year-old. That's what he wants out of a song. He doesn't want it sophisticated. When God listens to a song, what pleases him is sex with a 12-year-old. So
on a more serious note, God was able to provide some really solid advice when he needed to. For instance, when Terry told God that everything seemed bad, God simply responded with, plant trees. Unfathomably based, touch grass. In addition to advice, there was also the odd warning. God predicted the pandemic. Election. I wonder what God meant by that. I'm sure it's nothing. God's only all-powerful and omnipotent. Why would he know something that we don't? Don't worry about it. But, to be fair, the omens have been going fucking hard this year. Kamala the elephant getting euthanized, Moo Deng casting her vote, and Peanut the squirrel literally haunting the site of Harris's defeat. God clearly wanted Trump to win, and he sent the Archangel Shinzo to make it happen. Surprise, surprise, most who came across TempleOS did not engage with it on a spiritual level. Though it was still highly appealing to tech enthusiasts who saw it sort of like the programming equivalent of outsider art, which at least accomplishes one of Terry's goals. He said that Lustos is for programming as entertainment. Sometimes Terry would be extremely proud of TempleOS, believing that it would exist for thousands of years and that he would be revered as a second Solomon. But other times he would be less sure, saying, "Is it going to be as big as Solomon's Temple? I don't know, but we'll see." Usually, he was just happy that there was plenty of interest and people were downloading it. And he had every right to be proud of his creation, since despite having no wide appeal or application, it's capable of a surprising amount of things. Not just what I've mentioned here, but a whole bunch of other strange, big-brained words that I don't understand. If you really want to know more, then here is the TempleOS charter for all of you tech autists to gawp at. Maybe all of the numbers and funny words mean something to you. And if you find it hard to read and headache-inducing to look at, just be glad that you didn't have to research this video. My staff and I are so fucking sick of looking at cyan. The whole project was clearly pretty bonkers, and as you would expect, TempleOS was met with a fair amount of laughter and ridicule. However, those who recognised that it was not designed for heavy use in the real world were extremely impressed. Regardless of its lack of practical applications and its oddball nature, the fact that Terry had built a working operating system and his own compiler completely by himself was like, and I quote, "one man building a skyscraper." For some perspective, about 920 devs wrote the roughly 40 million lines of code that made up Windows 7, which works out at about 43,500 lines each. Meanwhile, Terry alone did almost triple that for a complete work that he completely masterminded all by himself. This is why Terry has so much respect and admiration in the programming community. Because that's pretty fucking insane. But what wasn't insane was Terry's dedication to spreading the good news. He had been posting his work and providing regular updates since 2008 under the username Lucid on his eponymous subreddit. Initially, Terry was ignored or received the odd reply saying, "What the fuck are you talking about?" But over time he developed a bit of a following as he became a regular fixture of programming forums in between the regular nuking of all of his accounts due to certain language he would use in his posts. Eventually, his presence grew enough that he was discovered by Kiwi Farms in 2012, and he was also profiled by Motherboard, the tech wing of Vice, in 2014. After the completion of TempleOS, Terry made a lot of YouTube videos showing it off and bragging about it.
Hi, I'm Terry Davis. I'm the smartest programmer that's ever lived. I was chosen by God to make his temple. I was given divine intellect.
I'm not going to lie, the tone is well earned, but in between discussions of programming and TempleOS, Terry would very often go off on tangents where he would talk about the CIA and other tidbits from his backstory. Oh, and he also thought that Larry Page, the Google co-founder, was a prominent enough member of his audience to warrant videos being essentially addressed directly to him. Because schizophrenia. Also, because schizophrenia, when faced with criticism, Terry would usually get very angry and aggressively assert his genius.
Let's be clear, I'm literally the smartest programmer that has ever lived, okay? Fuck you. Now watch this. This will blow your fucking mind. Check this shit out. Look at that. See that? Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. Smartest programmer ever lived, okay?
But what he would also do is reply with a comment reading "God says," followed by an incomprehensible string of letters. A clear sign that Terry was using After Egypt to get God's response to his followers' feedback. But Terry didn't need God fighting in his corner. Terry was perfectly capable of handling his detractors all by himself, by telling them all that they were that needed to start programming like a white man. Terry's genius came with a price. He hated incompetence and was harsh on anyone that he saw as beneath him. If you didn't do something very well or you asked a stupid question in his chat, he would call you his favourite word. He also continued to talk a lot of shit about Linus Torvalds, but you'll be surprised to know that throughout Terry's time building TempleOS, he was relatively stable. Relatively. But with the project finished, his next job was to serve as the high priest of God's temple, which was a very public-facing job. And you all know what the internet is like. So things are about to get a lot more entertaining, but it's also about to get deeply tragic. With Terry's growing profile and enhanced presence came increasing scrutiny, which he continued to take in his own very characteristic fashion.
This shit, what the series, what? This is like the most delicious war game I've ever seen. This is total Ville. This is, you could not make it more ish. This is absolute utopia, okay? This is fucking to the, this is so, what is this fucking?
I think that clip sets the tone for this section nicely because, in case you've forgotten, Terry was extremely fucking paranoid. Like most happy, physically healthy, non-suicidal people, Terry feared the CIA and saw what he called CIA N-words following and fucking with him pretty much everywhere he went. Anyone cutting him off on the road was a CIA N-word trying to get him killed in a crash. CIA N-words sought to confuse him by rearranging shop shelves. CIA N-words sought to tempt him into noncery by having tween-age children following him around in the DMV. I really wish I was joking, but these are things that Terry has actually claimed. Terry's mind really was something else. He was seeing the CIA N-words here, CIA N-words there, CIA N-words everywhere. But why N-words? Well, in addition to CIA agents, Terry was also seeing aliens. So maybe Shabazz was after him. Or maybe the word was a sort of talisman, as Terry likely said it so much as a way to ward off CIA agents. You know, kind of like how vampires are weak against garlic. Feds are weak against the N-word. Maybe that's the case, I don't know. But I do find that pretty fucking funny. He was also probably just saying it because that was his weird schizo tick. It was just a tick that he had. I mean, considering how widely and casually he used that word, I don't think Terry was actually racist. But why would the CIA be onto him? Sure, I can imagine that a lot of the internet is monitored and subverted against all of us, but what three-letter agency would care about some schizophrenic making a cookie operating system? Does After Egypt actually work, and is it really the voice of the Omnissiah? Is the CIA trying to stop us from talking to God? Well, no, because those fuckers have no souls, so why would they have any concept of or care for the spiritual? They just didn't like the fact that TempleOS may have also been built as a response to the CIA putting backdoors in the Linux kernel and other dependencies. So they would have suppressed TempleOS because it didn't have any vulnerabilities for them to exploit. After all, no networking, no infiltration. But it wasn't just TempleOS that the CIA was looking to subvert. Terry believed that they wanted to sabotage the expanding accessibility of software by making programming terminology increasingly obtuse and hard to understand and work with. Clearly, Terry had a lot to say about the CIA, and none of it was polite, which provided the world with some excellent memes and neologisms, like the most famous piece of internet vernacular that Terry is the originator of, glowies, which comes from Terry teaching us how to recognise any and all infiltrators and other malevolent forces in our spaces. They glow in the dark. But it's all well and good to know how to spot them, but what are we supposed to do about them? What means do we have at our disposal to protect ourselves from them? Well, the most iconic Terryism of them all tells you just that.
The CIA glow in the dark. You can see them if you're driving. You just run them over. That's what you do. Fucking CIA.
I suppose that explains the government's big push for abolishing private car ownership. But for legal reasons, I need to say that all you do if you spot a glowy in the wild is block them and move on. Don't interact with them, don't give them any information, and don't join their Discord server. I disavow taking any violent measures against them, as did many others, because Terry's use of certain language got him banned from a number of forums and social media platforms, including YouTube, Reddit, and Something Awful. It's a shame because Terry wasn't well and they just couldn't help it. But unfortunately, terms of service are terms of service, so OS News also had to ban him. However, there was still enough goodwill that its editor, Croc Kamen, still published an article about TempleOS, then still known as Luz Thos, with Terry's input. Believe it or not, all of the talk about glow-in-the-dark CIA N-words is actually among the less unhinged things that Terry said in his time. As an internet figure who made videos that were often hours long, there is a lot of footage and written material out there of Terry saying a lot of other wild, incomprehensible, and appalling shit. Like this infamous tidbit. And for the record, I do not believe that any of this is actually true. This is all clearly written while Terry was extra delusional. Though, I'm not gonna lie, he was cooking the part about Dune. However, I absolutely disavow the rest of it. This post, however, 10 out of 10. No notes, go off king. In 2016, the world went fucking nuts. And not to be outdone, Terry decided to dial up his own insanity even further. On the 16th of March, he started streaming. His scuffed sleep schedule often allowed him to stream for 12 hours at a time, doing some programming, showing off and tinkering with TempleOS, and fed posting a lot. Good Lord, Terry fed posted a lot while being egged on by his chat. Because telling a schizophrenic to kill the CIA is a great idea. Also, 4chan inevitably noticed that Terry's phone number was on his website, so they started calling him on stream. Terry reacted exactly as you would expect.
What about GCC? I can't understand you. What'd you say? Do I see the fun in GCC? Hell no, I'm a white man. I wrote my own fucking compiler. I'm not like Linus. I'm a professional. I started at Ticketmaster in 1990 and we wrote a compiler. The difference in a professional and amateur, the difference between an amateur and a professional is you write your own compiler, okay? I have a 20,000 line divine intellect compiler that operates just in time and ahead of time. You seem to be in denial. Why don't you fucking download my 2 meg? You can download my 2 meg distribution that has all the source code on it, and you can compile with my fucking compiler. You're fucking fucking.
Terry once mentioned that he had reached out to a woman who understands physics to help him program TempleOS's physics engine, with no success because, as Terry said, I used the word N-word and she probably doesn't want to be associated with that. She has sponsors and stuff. But the mistake that Terry made was reading her blog on stream. So it wasn't long before trolls figured out exactly who he was talking about. a YouTuber named Diana Cowan, also known as Physics Girl. Of course, the trolls then did what they do best by starting to impersonate her. And while Terry was very good at spotting the imposters, unfortunately, his hit rate wasn't 100%. So when Diana emailed Terry, he opened it on stream, and the email was full of porn. This earned him a strike on his channel, which lost him his streaming privileges. Eventually, Terry became convinced that he was married to Diana, though it's unclear whether he made this up in his own head or if this was a Julie situation manufactured by trolls. But as for the real Diana, at this time she had no idea who Terry even was. He had just developed a parasocial relationship with her. Unable to stream thanks to the strike, Terry pivoted towards vlogging by going out on what he called paladin walks while recording for Diana and staying vigilant against the threat of CIA agents.
We got a person here. It's a CIA agent. No. He probably talks to himself and he doesn't even have a camera. So like that's how you just carry around a camera, then you can talk to yourself, and then they don't think you're fucking crazy.
While out and about, Terry would also sing covers of metal songs and drum the beat with his hands pretty impressively. But I don't know if the RIAA won't put me in a jigsaw trap while leaving my family to rot in a black site prison if I show you these. So here's a clip of Terry showing his impressive drumming abilities while demonstrating how he made his own music instead.
Mostly it's being a monkey, you know. Just play a drum solo for 10 minutes, just trying to make it interesting. You know, it's anti-patterns and shit, and I don't know, whatever.
Terry was a pretty big fan of music and even gave TempleOS a function for making music called God Songs, which works on RNG like After Egypt. But Terry, being out in public was made rather risky, mostly due to the fact that he had no filter whatsoever, especially when it came to using his favourite word. So there was the odd occasion where he would get himself into a little bit of trouble on stream.
How you doing? I'm sitting here talking about sexual assault. You walk up here and fucking get in my face.
I didn't get in your face. I
okay, sorry. Okay.
Over there. I didn't even want nothing to do with you.
Okay, I'm talking in a private conversation. You come walking over here.
This is a public street. I'm walking to the fucking store.
Okay.
The place I see you walk damn near every fucking day. I never say nothing to you in my life. And now you want to just disrespect.
I mean, all of this is funny now because thankfully nothing happened, but that could very easily have gone very, very badly. Terry was lucky that the black guy recognised him as being from around this area, and you can see from the look in his face as he realised that the guy he was talking to clearly wasn't well. But what gets me the most is just how casually Terry said that to the guy as a greeting. And then instantly getting really defensive and confrontational when the black guy got offended. Fortunately for Terry, the worst trouble that he managed to get himself into was getting banned from YouTube entirely. Most likely for being Terry in the comments section, but other than the Diana chicanery and sperging in the comments, he was mostly left alone and even supported by his followers, who hoped that Terry would be able to get the help that he clearly needed as his mind unravelled. He may have been a bit of a lol cow, but unlike most, he was mostly harmless and he never brought any ill will on himself. And the sympathy that his fans had for him only increased as it became more and more obvious that Terry was very lost and aimless. In a rare self-aware moment, he even reflected on his lack of purpose in an announcement that his bird Percival was dying.
I live in kind of an old environment. All I do is I go to dentists and doctors. My parents go to dentists and doctors. And that's all we do. We watch TV. They go to the casino. I don't watch TV. I watch. Anyway, so it's kind of, I feel like I don't really have any, I made God's temple. And now I'm waiting for something to happen. I've been fighting to bring it to fruition, but I'm in some kind of prison or something. So basically now I just kind of kill time. But I'm God's high priest, so there's nothing better to do with your time than kill time with Mr. God and enjoy divine intellect all day long.
He said, I made God's temple and now I'm waiting for something to happen. Yeah, about that. With the benefit of hindsight, it seems like Terry began the slow spiral once TempleOS was finished, and being left with nothing else to focus on, he started to slowly go off the deep end. It also really didn't help that Terry believed that his meds stifled his creativity and turned him into a lump, and that his shrinks were actually all actors hired by the CIA to fuck with him, which worsened his paranoid delusions so much more that he ended up believing that even his own parents were in on the conspiracy. So, as his mind unravelled, he ended up taking it out on them, calling them sheep for not believing that he had a direct line of communication with God, and generally just being completely unhinged at them.
The reason to speak publicly is to preach and to announce. Friends, Romans, countrymen are the problem.
No, they're not. No,
yes, they are the problem. I fucking see with the eyes wide open. I see with the eyes wide open. You are the righteous Catholics. You are the righteous Catholic. The righteous power of Rome and the respect of Rome. Rome.
Now, I know that clip is fucking hilarious out of context, but if you know what's going on, it's a little bit harrowing. Terry's parents were clearly elderly and out of their depth as they struggled to put up with him. I mean, look at the way his dad tried to push back on what Terry was saying and got completely steamrolled. On another occasion, he even pointed out, if God talks to you, then what do you have against his creatures? But sadly, the home situation wasn't just a case of Terry having a normal one with his parents in the background. There are a number of videos that Terry recorded of himself screaming directly at them in a way that, I do hate to admit, is darkly funny. I might be going to hell for the fact that this is one of my favourite Terry clips.
That dog is getting That dog is getting That fucking dog is getting Fuck you! The dog is getting
By whom?
By the fucking other dogs!
But now it's the time to stop being funny, because after 14 years of mentally circling the drain around his parents, Terry finally snapped. On the 25th of August 2017, he was arrested and charged with domestic battery. He beat up his dad. After some time in jail and then, of course, a mental hospital, Terry obviously couldn't go back to living with his parents. So from that point onwards, he was homeless. Until he was arrested again 6 days later for open gross lewdness, or as Terry put it, urinating in public. Which, I mean, come on, he was homeless. What the fuck else was he supposed to do? Practically every single place doesn't let you use the bathroom unless you're a customer, and they especially won't let you use it if they know you're a homeless guy in case you do drugs in there. The following October, Terry's trouble with the law continued as he was arrested for a third time after missing his court date for the battery charge, but he was quickly bailed out by the owner of 8chan. Terry then lived in his van for a while, surviving by continuing to stream and taking donations. And don't worry, we are not completely out of laughs as we embark on Terry's homeless arc, because he continued to Fed post about the CIA, even Fed posting directly at them on occasion, writing in the Contact Us section of their own website, "I am King Terry the Terrible. The CIA will be executed with an A10 gun, the fist of God." Unfortunately, these streams weren't like his old content. This was punished Terry, so everything about this story is darker now. These streams were hosted on Terry's own website, so there were no repercussions whenever he watched porn or had, let's just say, a few DSP moments on camera for Diana while waiting for her to move into his van with him, which he believed she was eventually going to do. In January of 2018, Terry's fans got rather concerned when he stopped streaming and he missed his next court date, eventually resurfacing in what is believed to be his sister's house in Phoenix. However, it wasn't very long before Terry went homeless again to escape the dog catchers, or in non-schizo language, "I'm not going back to the fucking loony bin." Unfortunately, Terry didn't have his van anymore at this point, so he spent a lot of time on the street and using the computers and facilities in libraries as he roamed all over the country, popping up in Atlanta, Houston, California, and finally Portland, where he showed up that March. Everywhere that Terry went, his fans would track him down to chat with him and even give him food. But he always refused any offers of accommodation. As far as Terry was concerned, all he needed was his camera and his Bible. When Terry talked to his fans or to his camera, it was noted that his mixture of insanity and utter genius had an almost shamanic quality, like in this clip here.
I had a bird, right? So I pulled up YouTube and put a bird image there. And then as I was watching my bird look at the monitor, it filled me with the horror. The horror of a bird looking at a computer monitor. It doesn't have a mate, and it sees a mate on there. And the horror of the disconnect between its understanding of reality, it was a horror to me. And that bothers me because, like, for a science, it's only a scientist that feels that horror because he understands everything. He looks around, he understands all this stuff, and it kind of fills him with horror if people don't understand it.
Is it me, or did Terry, in a bit of a weird and esoteric way, sort of predict AI waifus? Well, if you want to know where that leads, I've already got you covered. Do you want to know the saddest thing about the ravaged state of Terry's mind while he was homeless? Whenever someone got Terry talking about programming, he would lock the fuck in, become perfectly lucid, and the old Terry would be back at the top of his game. The most important case of this is an interview that he gave with a fan named Mihai Isvaranu in a McDonald's. And it's very striking just how personable Terry was throughout. For over an hour, he talked perfectly lucidly and brilliantly about programming, as if all of his demons had been suddenly exorcised on the spot. Everything that he said went completely over my head, but the consensus in the comments from people that understand computers and programming is that Terry was dropping non-stop bangers for the entire interview, and everyone was very impressed by his genius. And honestly, you love to see it. I mean, look at him go as he explained his philosophy behind programming TempleOS in Holy See.
Public-private or no?
No, I don't like public-private. I wanted everything public. Yeah, I wanted it. I like the abuse and the power of assembly. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So basically, I made it a raw, powerful language with no policemen. No constraints. You know what I mean? So you can. I tried to make it maximum. Do anything you want. No cops. So
yeah, like the Lone Ranger.
Yeah. If you want to do it that way, go ahead.
Random checks at the airport.
Yeah. So public and private, no, I had no use for that.
Not only was that a really fucking good analogy, but Terry even managed to crack a joke while he was at it. Obviously, the interview didn't go by without any Terryisms, but it's striking how they come across in a much more charming way when his head is in a relatively good place.
Like, let's just keep this simple. 2 speakers on every system, a 2-button mouse. So if Terry was king, he'd fix all this clusterfuck. Like, go fuck you and your 6 speakers. And go like and buy a PCI card. If you want your flight simulator with 6 speakers, you don't make us suffer. You go buy a PCI card because we don't want to fuck with that. This is insanity.
As you can see, he was much more toned down and chilled out. Little profanity, no gamer words, just what may or may not be a broken Ticketmaster NDA. Towards the end of the interview, Esperanu asked after Terry's well-being, and he gave a few tidbits about his recent history. For example, a drum set that he had crowdfunded, which arrived the day before the incident with his dad, went to Goodwill after Terry was kicked out of his parents' house. And he also lost his van to the impound lot during one of his stretches in jail. When the conversation turned to God, Terry talked about how it's difficult to convince people to reject atheism because it is tempting to not believe in the truth of God's existence. That the same thing is now happening with the Earth being round or the moon landing, and that even he felt that temptation on occasion.
I take it seriously, but it's tempting to not believe it, you know.
Yeah.
No, here's
and everything.
Yeah. But here's the beauty. The very same people who rejected the Bible and love science now suffered the very same frustration when people reject the moon landing. They're like, no, that's my religion. You can't reject the moon landing. And it's the very same perfect justice that they rejected the Bible. It's like, dude, did you even look at the forensic psychology of all this shit back there? They didn't just make all that shit up. The intricacies and the psychology of all those oracles and all that crazy shit in the Bible, they didn't just pull that out of like nothing, you know. There really is a phenomena that's not all bullshit. You can't be that crazy and intricate and like complex, you know. The forensic psychology just doesn't make any sense. That it's just nothing, okay, in the Bible, because it's stupidity to like
People just keep this in mind when people ask you questions. Just ask yourself, are they trolling or are they serious, right? Because not everyone.
Flat Earth, I would assume, is trolling.
Some people aren't.
Okay.
So, in a bit of an I told you so moment, Terry drew some satisfaction from the fact that the slippery slope from rejecting God is now at the point of rejecting the modern religions of Maheccan science. If you're able to make sense of what the little creatures inside the machines are up to, then I highly recommend watching the whole interview. But if you're just a Terry fan, the last 20 or so minutes are pretty good as well. Overall, regardless of the nature of one's fascination with Terry, it's just really, really nice to see him at his best. So, we've gotten to know Terry the programmer, Terry the prophet, and Terry the schizo, but what about Terry the man? Underneath it all, who was he really? Well, not even Terry knew. But he had a lot of moments where he was surprisingly self-aware, pontificating on reality as someone who already had a very tenuous grasp on it.
The Truman Show reflects an example of a strange reality. You know, he's like gradually he picks up that something's not quite right about my life. You know what I'm saying? My reality is just not quite right. And then eventually he discovers he's in a bubble and he's on TV. So, Terry, me, there's just something not right about my reality. And I don't have any, maybe one day he came up with the conception, hey, what if I'm like in a bubble and there's cameras? And he had this conception that explained his reality. What I need is some concept of what my reality is. You know what I mean?
For the Truman Show guy, his answer was he's on a TV show and they're taking cameras of him. For Terry, I have zero conception of what my reality is. I don't know.
Despite Terry's connection with God, he never understood why the radio would talk to him in what appeared to be codes, why it would answer when he started soliloquizing, and things like that. The Truman Show angle is interesting, not just because of his paranoia about being stalked by the CIA, but also from being an online public figure. Terry had a lot of lucid moments like those, where he was surprisingly profound and observant about the world around him. For instance, here he is criticising the way that modernity is a leech for one's spirit and purpose.
You see the beauty and the desolation of the modern world. The modern world is horribly desolate. That's biblical. Desolation is the punishment. Catastrophic success. The young lions lack prey, you know.
The concept of catastrophic success is pretty aptly applied today. I mean, Jesus Christ, look at Afghanistan. And look at how many times in history where great empires fell because they grew decadent and complacent before being overthrown by stronger opponents. It's just an inevitable stage of the civilizational cycle. And it's really unfortunate that we all just happen to have been born in the Kali Yuga. Here, Terry touches on the idea of spiritual and civilizational decline once again.
At the moment, what I think is, I'm glad I'm not a loser. I look at the desolation. The punishment for this generation is no thrills. Your parents have cut off your balls, okay? Your parents, all energy comes from God, okay? All thought comes from God. You little arrogant fool. Now you're going to be locked in hell in blackness. And you'll have to live in it and die in it. Live and die in blackness.
I find it rather ironic that Terry, a computer programmer, seemed to have been rather Ted-pilled in a number of ways, as he clearly understood the concept of surrogate activities where, instead of enacting will, power and change on the world in a high-stakes life-or-death environment, you're just doing a bunch of busy work that vaguely simulates such action for the sake of hollow fulfillment without the visceral triumph of survival. And the resulting desolation and blackness that Terry condemned is clearly the lack of excitement and adventure in a world that has been stripped of all of its magic and spiritual power as modernity drove us away from God. Terry also commented on the overstimulating effect of modernity, with the ubiquity of screens resulting in a lack of downtime and opportunity for contemplation, which is bad for the soul.
Yeah, I've been like antisocial for like 25 years or something, or all my life or something. Catches up with you after a while. You're like, I don't know. Yesterday I found myself alone, 3 a.m., nobody around. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay.
Obviously, touching grass is good for you, and seriously take time to unplug and reflect. It is necessary for your soul, but Terry also lamented that it's hard to escape from all of the noise. And unfortunately, being separate from those malignant influences just puts one even further out of touch with the rest of the world. Sadly, one of the biggest recurring themes of Terry's life is loneliness. Not just because of the difficulty in meeting him on his level, but simply because he had a big reclusive streak. Despite having a lot of siblings, Terry didn't really talk to his family very much. Having said, Jesus did not talk to his siblings, he wanted nothing to do with them. Strangers are better, I'm the same way. And he preferred the company of his pet cockatiels. If you've heard a chirping sound in the background of some of the clips that I've shown you, it wasn't a ceiling bird, it was just a caged one. On the note of the bird, I think that the most poignant thing that Terry has ever said was an anecdote about his bird looking at his monitor when he had code open, and the thoughts that he had about it.
What's reality? I don't know. You just have to, when my bird was looking at my computer monitor, I thought, whoa, that bird has no idea what he's looking at. And yet, what does the bird do? Does he panic? No, he can't really panic. He just does the best he can. Is he able to live in a world where he's so ignorant? Well, he doesn't really have a choice. Yeah, he can kind of live. It's usually the bird's okay, even though he doesn't understand the world. And he can kind of learn what's safe and what's dangerous. So that's where I've been living. You're that bird looking at the monitor, and you're thinking to yourself, I can figure this out. And you know, maybe you have some bird ideas that are, maybe that's the best you can do.
I think that everyone, especially our guys in the audience, can relate on some level to seeing the world just like that. But it must be easy to envy the blissful ignorance of the bird. Maybe we should be more like that, and just have the indomitable human spirit to keep moving forward through a world that's just too big for us to understand. I mean, how scary can horrors beyond our comprehension really be? Sadly, despite the fact that Terry had posted a surprising number of gems in his more lucid moments, he deleted the vast majority of his videos because God told him that thou shalt not litter was the 11th commandment, and Terry believed that he had littered the internet with his videos. It's a big shame because Terry clearly had a lot of wisdom to share, but also it made sourcing a handful of specific clips a little bit of a nightmare, especially since a lot of his Kiwi Farms thread is now full of dead links. However, thankfully there are a few archives here and there of Terry's greatest hits. However, there was one video of Terry's that stayed up. It was posted on the 11th of August 2018, and it's rather haunting.
Well, I'm King Terry, and learned how to purify myself in a horribly impure environment. It's pretty rough living homeless and in a field outside a little town, and coming into their library, and it's a very pure town, and must have been an extreme shock to them to see such a horribly sick person come in here and pollute everything, and it was a lot of torture to snap me into an ability to handle purity for this job. There's a little castle over there. Let's see, where's that castle? There it is. Oh no. So, that's a little castle. I don't know. I really like this library.
So come here and use their computer and smoke out here. They must have been freaking out because such an impure person was in their presence. Oh well, I was clueless. Now I used to have a respect for purity. So well, it's good to be king. Wait, maybe. I think maybe I'm just like a little bizarre little person who walks back and forth. Whatever, you know. But
later on, Terry was walking back and forth, up and down railway tracks in the Dales in Oregon. I let the video play in full because sadly, those were the last words of Terry A. Davis. At the age of just 48, he was hit by a train. Of course, speculation about a conspiracy was rife. Did the CIA get him? Was he just caught up in a tragic accident? God forbid, did he kill himself? Well, the train engineer believed the latter. Terry had his back to the train and then turned around at the very last moment. But I genuinely don't know if that sounds like suicide to me. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if Terry was just so far off in his own little world that he didn't even notice the train coming until it was too late. Because as you can see from his final video, he was very, very spacey and his mind seemed to have a lot of trouble focusing. Regardless of what had happened, God's temple had been built and its craftsman was called back to his master. Terry was buried in a family grave in Bunker's Memory Garden Cemetery in Nevada. Sadly, his mother passed just 12 days later, and she was laid to rest alongside her son. But it took a little while for the news to sink in for his disciples back on Earth. Nita Schizo, who broke the story for the Dales Chronicle, was inundated with calls from fans as far afield as Australia, hoping that the whispers of Terry's death were just rumours. Schizo later recalled being struck by the fact that a lot of the callers weren't just programming enthusiasts, but people who just genuinely liked Terry. After the news was further confirmed by Terry's sister on Facebook, tributes poured in as the internet went into mourning. Despite all of the baggage and his mild lolcow status, Terry was pretty revered in the programming community, and he departed this world to unanimous praise for his achievements. Granted, a good bunch of them did so anonymously because you wouldn't think that Terry would be particularly popular in that community, which seems to these days be dominated by people that love thigh-high socks and estrogen, but even they couldn't help but revere the hardcore Christian that just couldn't stop yelling the N-word. Terry was just fucking built different. I mean, he fucking built his own compiler. After Terry's passing, the TempleOS project was kept alive in a couple of ways. For one, Terry had appointed a successor to his role as High Priest of God's Temple before he died.
yeah, if I had to pick somebody to be a high priest, I think Elon Musk would be a good choice. You know, he's demonstrated, I think he'd be good. Let's see if anybody's got any better suggestions.
But TempleOS is still maintained alongside TinkerOS, which is essentially a clone of the original system but with extra bug fixes and support for more modern hardware. It's nice to see that there's still plenty of love for it out there, which echoes what Croc Kamen said in that article all those years ago. I'm glad that operating systems like Lucid still exist, in that it shows that computing can still be a hobby. Why is everybody so serious these days? If I want to code an operating system that uses interpretive dance as an input method, I should be allowed to do so. Companies like Apple be damned. Another quirk of Terry's that was kept alive was his abrasiveness, as trolls kept his beef with Linus Torvalds going from beyond the grave. In late 2018, Linux.org, not affiliated with the Linux Foundation, changed their code of conduct to champion increasing diversity. So the site got hacked and got replaced with 2 versions of a message of resistance. I'll show you the less explicit one on screen, but the other is a goatse image, because of fucking course it was, with a message that reads thusly. R.I.P. my Terry Davis. Linux is for it's what Terry would have wanted. You know, for a lonely, schizophrenic, ambiguously racist homeless man, Terry left a hell of a legacy, being remembered and sort of romanticised online as a tortured genius. I cannot stress enough just how impressive it was that Terry built TempleOS completely alone. No one else had ever done such a thing before. Linux pretty much became a massive community project. Bill Gates did not create DOS from scratch, and Steve Wozniak built his OS from Unix code. Terry often raved that he was the greatest programmer in the world, and honestly, I'm not convinced that that was just schizo rambling. Terry was genuinely one of the greats, and if not for his illness, I believe that he could have gone on to do some truly amazing things. CIA glories aside, what really gets me about Terry's story before he went off the deep end is just how sort of wholesome he could be at points. As far as internet lolcows go, Terry was deeply sympathetic and even pretty beloved. After all, a lot of his fans did their earnest best to help him, and I think it's because many people on the internet would have seen a kind of kindred spirit in Terry. There are a lot of lonely outcasts out there with a lot to give, but no real outlet for their specific kind of energy or means of being understood in the real world. And the most endearing thing about Terry wasn't his genius or his Sisyphean battle with his own psyche, but just the fact that he often had that oddball charm.
A normal person can't be a cleric and a fighter. But if you're schizophrenic, fuck yeah, man.
Deep down, I think he was just a really goofy guy who loved God and programming. I think one of my favourite Terry clips is the one of him just showing off a realistic elephant that he programmed.
I like elephants and God likes elephants. Here's a realistic elephant. It's done with interpolation with vectors. Sometimes it works. It's kind of limited. Anyway, so if you don't want to go for realism, you can go for better than realism. What do you mean better than realism? How about an elephant with blue eyes?
I just think it's nice. Terry's right. God does like elephants. But even when Terry wasn't lucid or wholesome and was suffering at his worst moments, the biggest difference between him and so many other troubled online figures is the fact that he tried. You can tell that Terry tried to escape his own head whenever he managed to come to his senses. Like this occasion where he snapped back to reality in the middle of an argument with his mother in just a really fucking heartbreaking way.
Wait, let's go. Have fun with your shit television.
Daddy!
I'm sorry. I made myself, I don't know, you were good and I made myself hatred for some reason. I don't know. Forgive me, I have to try and figure out why I remember that I love you. Because mom is the best mom in the world.
Thank you.
Damn straight, right? Okay.
I know, I give all you brat.
For all of his flaws, Terry wasn't a complete train wreck who revelled in his delusions and fucked up antics while blaming all of his problems on autism or trolls. Even when Terry was homeless and was clearly aged and a lot worse for wear, as Scrump and Trig pointed out in their own Terry video, he was just a haircut, shower and change of clothes away from looking presentable and fairly put together again. With enough patience and understanding, I think that Terry could have managed to have a fairly stable life if the right kind of support was available to him. I think you've seen enough moments where Terry was himself again just for a moment to know that, in his own way, he was capable of expressing himself in rather beautiful ways. For instance, Terry clearly wasn't just talking about the bird. All he needed was help. It's just a terrible shame that no one really knew how. But in the end, I hope that Terry finally found peace. Terry is quoted as saying, "The purpose of man is to entertain God." And for better or worse, Terry was certainly entertaining. So, shout out to everyone who keeps an archive of Terry's best moments to keep his legacy alive, and thanks to all of you who shared your favourite Terry moments on that tweet I posted. That was actually very, very helpful for making this video. And it's heartening to know that people cared enough about Terry to bear witness to his memory like that. So maybe pay a visit to God's Third Temple and pay respects to the High Priest, King Terry, the smartest programmer who ever lived. Now, I used to watch Terry an awful lot back in the day, and I'm not going to lie, boys, I miss him.
The prime directive is to glorify your Creator. Bring glory to God. Whatever glory you got, you bring it. Okay.
Please throw, no take, only throw.
It's Count Dankula on YouTube. Everybody should subscribe.